Do you really think the Rothschild Surrealist Ball was nothing more than a strange little dinner party thrown to entertain a bunch of bored rich people back in the 1970s? Just a fancy night where Audrey Hepburn showed up with a birdcage sitting on her head, and Salvador Dali stood around with stuffed animals to show off his avant-garde style? What if I told you that the photos you've seen online, the ones people pass around as proof of how odd the ultra-rich can be, were actually meant to distract you? What if all that velvet, all those diamonds, and those surreal costumes were just a cover for something else? Something that had nothing to do with art at all, and everything to do with a kind of feeding frenzy. Not for the guests, but for whatever was living inside them? The official version says that on December 12, 1972, Marie-Hélène de Rothschild hosted an extravagant costume ball at the Château de Ferrières, just outside Paris. Society pages still describe it as the height of elite excess. But there's another account of that night, one that was never supposed to reach the public. In 2003, while workers were renovating a condemned building in the Montmartre area of Paris, a demolition crew uncovered a metal box hidden beneath the decaying floorboards of a small apartment. Inside, they found the diary of a man identified only as Pierre L, a waiter who disappeared from public records soon after working one high-profile event in the winter of 1972. His journal doesn't read like a description of a glamorous party. It reads like a report from a crime scene. He writes about a night when the barrier between our physical world and something parasitic was intentionally weakened. According to him, the gathering wasn't a celebration at all. It was the renewal of a contract, a ritual that demanded certain biological materials, particular sound frequencies, and one specific sacrifice to preserve the power of the families seated at those long tables. He claims this is the story Stanley Kubrick tried to reveal before he died. He says this is the truth that was removed from the final 24 minutes of Eyes Wide Shut. And he insists that if you look carefully at the guests in those well-known photographs, you'll notice something unsettling. No one is really smiling. The preparation, he writes, started long before anyone arrived at the chateau. The Baroness didn't send out ordinary invitations. The text on them was printed backward. To read the message, each guest had to hold the card up to a mirror. Art historians later brushed it off as a playful reference to surrealism's love of reversals and dreamlike logic. But in certain occult traditions, a mirror isn't just a surface that reflects your image. It's considered a doorway. Reversal is said to be the language of the adversary. By making every guest read their invitation through a mirror, the hosts were symbolically guiding them into an inverted world before they ever stepped onto the estate. It was, according to the diary, a form of agreement. By accepting what they saw in the mirror, they were consenting to leave their human sense of morality behind, on the other side of the glass. When the limousines pulled up to the Château de Ferrières that night, the whole place was glowing like it was on fire. Orange and red lights moved across the walls, making it look as if the chateau was being swallowed by flames. But no one walked in through the main entrance. They had to get down and crawl. The doorway was sealed off by a huge tunnel made of black ribbons and thick fabric, woven together to resemble a massive spiderweb. In his diary, Pierre mentioned something no camera ever showed. He said hidden within that web were high-quality speakers that played a steady, low vibration the entire time. It wasn't music, it was infrasound, a tone just below what the human ear can fully detect. That kind of frequency is known to trigger dread, nausea, and, more than anything, a sense of detachment from reality. As some of the most powerful people in the world crawled through that tight, dark passage, their minds were already being altered. They were being stripped down inside. By the time they stepped into the grand hall, where servants dressed as cats hissed and purred in their faces. They weren't the same people who had arrived in those limousines. The CEOs, the artists, the royalty, they were gone. What stood there instead were empty canvases, ready for something else to take hold. The real horror, Pierre wrote, began at the dinner tables. You've probably seen the photographs, the plates lined with fur, the strange, unsettling centerpieces. But have you ever looked closely at what was scattered between the forks and knives? Pieces of what looked like plastic dolls. Arms, legs, torsos, little heads with wide, glassy eyes were spread across the tables. The official story says it was a tribute to Hans Bellmer, the artist known for creating disturbing sculptures out of disjointed doll parts as a statement about the artificial human form. But Pierre's diary tells a different story. Hours before the guests arrived, while he was helping set the tables, he accidentally knocked one of the doll arms onto the floor. It didn't hit the ground with a hollow plastic sound. It landed with a soft, damp thud. When he bent down to pick it up, he realized it was warm. He wrote that it didn't feel like porcelain or celluloid. It felt like something organic that had been coated in resin. And the scent drifting from the centerpieces wasn't dusty or synthetic. Beneath the heavy perfume of flowers, he noticed something metallic, coppery, sharp. The diary suggests something deeply disturbing, that these weren't ordinary dolls at all. They were biological shells. In 1972, there was an unusual spike in missing children reports across France and Belgium, especially from state-run institutions where paperwork could disappear without much notice. Years later, Pierre's own autopsy report was quietly sealed, and that only fueled the suspicions. According to the theory laid out in his writings, those doll fragments were part of a ritual process, an act of dark transformation. In certain occult traditions, an object that has been exposed to extreme trauma is believed to store negative energy. Some esoteric circles call that energy louche. The guests weren't simply eating beside strange artwork. They were seated inside a kind of energetic grid. They were drawing from whatever radiated out of those centerpieces just as surely as they were consuming the food placed before them. And then there was the food itself. The menu was filled with surreal jokes and wordplay. Dishes with names like insomnia soup and the devil's ribs. But the centerpiece of the evening was something known as the anatomy cake. There's a well-known photograph of it. It showed a life-sized woman made of pastry and sugar, lying naked on a bed of roses. Her abdomen appeared sliced open, revealing bright red entrails. Guests were photographed smiling, holding knives, cutting into her body as if it were nothing more than dessert. Pierre was standing nearby when the cake was served. He was holding a silver tray for the Baroness. He wrote that when the knife pierced the chest of the cake, the sound wasn't the crisp crack of sugar or the soft slice of sponge. It sounded like something fibrous tearing apart. Inside, he didn't see jam or fruit filling. He described a dark, thick substance that clung together and carried the smell of iron. He watched as a well-known banker, whose signature appears on the currency of a G7 nation, took a bite and immediately choked. His face drained of color. Sweat gathered on his forehead. A masked server leaned in and whispered something into his ear. The banker forced himself to swallow. Then he finished the entire serving. Pierre was clear about one thing. This was never meant to be a sweet course at the end of a meal. It was a test. By eating it, no matter what it truly was, the guests were proving their loyalty. They were showing that there was no boundary they wouldn't cross, no taboo they wouldn't accept. Once they took that bite, they were bound to whatever agreement had been made that night. It wasn't just some strange performance. According to the diary, it was a ritual meant to strip away whatever empathy these people still had, so they could return to their positions of power and make ruthless decisions without feeling a thing. But the part of the Rothschild Ball that unsettled me the most, the part that supposedly connects to Stanley Kubrick's death, was the masks. The dress code wasn't optional. It required black tie, long gowns, and surrealist headpieces. The guests wore elaborate masks that looked almost unreal. Some showed more than one face. Others were built like cages. The Baroness herself wore an animal head with diamond-shaped tears. We're told it was all just high fashion. But in the ritual context Pierre described, a mask isn't decoration. It's an instrument. He wrote that exactly at 2 a.m. Something shifted in the room. The music changed. The elegant waltzes faded out and were replaced by uneven, rhythmic drumming that didn't seem to follow any steady beat. That was when the guests began to change. The conversations in French, English, and German suddenly stopped. Instead, a low humming filled the hall. Then came harsh, clicking sounds that didn't resemble any language at all. Their movements grew stiff and unnatural. They didn't sway like tipsy party guests anymore. They jerked and twitched like marionettes tugged by invisible strings. Pierre believed the masks weren't concealing identities. They were muting humanity itself. He described the shapes of the masks, the horns, the cages, the doubled faces, as deliberate symbols, sigils. He claimed they functioned like antennas, designed to receive something. The ritual, he said, allowed archontic entities, parasitic intelligences from another dimension, to enter the bodies of the elite for a short time. For those few hours, the people who governed nations weren't entirely themselves. They were vessels. Any agreements made during that window, any promises whispered through those hollow eye holes, didn't come from human minds. Salvador Dali was in attendance that night, the same Dali who said he painted dreams and understood the subconscious better than Freud. If you study the photos from that evening, he stands out. He looks uneasy, small, withdrawn. His eyes appear wide in a way that doesn't look theatrical. It looks like fear. Pierre believed Dali understood that night that his surreal imagery was harmless compared to what the elite were actually doing. What he painted as metaphor, they practiced as reality. Dali left early, and in the years that followed, his art shifted toward darker, more religious themes, almost as if he were trying to make peace with something he had witnessed. And then there's Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick wasn't only a filmmaker. He was known for researching his subjects obsessively. When he announced Eyes Wide Shut, he told the public it was about jealousy and intimacy. According to this theory, that explanation was just a cover. The real inspiration, Pierre hinted, was the ball. Kubrick had reportedly studied the 1972 event in detail. Some claim he had contacts within intelligence circles who shared information about what truly took place inside those estates. He allegedly knew about the doll fragments. He knew about the strange banquet. He knew about the entities. The film released in theaters is considered a masterpiece, but some say it isn't the version Kubrick originally intended. People connected to the production have long claimed that the cut he screened for Warner Brothers executives 6 days before his death was different. It was said to be 24 minutes longer. Those missing minutes weren't extramarital arguments between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. They supposedly depicted the ritual more clearly. The dinner, the symbolic consumption, the moment the masked figures surrendered control. In that version, the secret society wasn't just portrayed as a group indulging in hidden pleasures. It was shown as an inner circle of occult practitioners binding themselves through blood contracts. When executives saw that cut, the story goes, the mood in the room changed. They told Kubrick it went too far. that it was dangerous. Kubrick, who was famous for demanding final cut privileges, refused to alter his work. 6 days later, he was gone. The official cause was a massive heart attack, yet he was said to be in strong health for his age. He was cautious about his safety, rarely left his estate, and reportedly controlled his own food and water sources. To some, the timing feels impossible to ignore. He presents what may have been his most revealing film, and less than a week later, he dies. Soon after, studio representatives arrived at his estate in England. They didn't just secure the film reels, they collected his notes, his journals, the research materials he had gathered, including photographs from the 1972 ball. The film's release was postponed. It went back into editing. The 24 minutes were removed. Some say they were destroyed. Others believe they were sealed away somewhere, kept as leverage. The version of Eyes Wide Shut that reached audiences, according to this narrative, was softened. What might have been a revelation became a dreamlike fiction. Still, even in the edited release, the symbols remain. The passwords, the masks, the circle of influence. For those who look closely enough, the message is still there. You might be telling yourself, this all happened a long time ago. 1972 feels distant, almost harmless. But thinking that way is the most dangerous part. The Rothschild Ball wasn't some isolated moment. According to this version of events, it was a soft reveal. A way to test how much they could show the public without anyone truly understanding what they were seeing. And because people didn't react with horror, because we labeled it fashion, art, or eccentricity, the spectacle only expanded. When I look at the world now, I'm told to notice the similarities. The Met Gala, the runway themes from major fashion houses, the imagery in big-budget music videos. The symbols feel familiar. I'm pointed toward the masks with no faces, the repeated references to cannibalism, blood, and twisted versions of the human body. Celebrities posing with replicas of their own heads. Private dinners mentioned in leaked emails that sound ritualistic. The claim is that they're no longer tucked away inside a secluded French chateau. Now, everything happens in front of cameras. The performance is broadcast live. The idea is that the ritual doesn't need secrecy anymore. It works in plain sight. And if I watch it, click on it, argue about the outfits, or share the clips, then I'm part of it too. My attention becomes the fuel. My curiosity turns into energy. In this version of the story, the dolls on those banquet tables aren't preserved limbs anymore. They're symbolic. They're us. We sit quietly, consuming the spectacle, feeding whatever force thrives on fear and fascination. Pierre L seemed to understand that. In the final entry of his diary, written the morning he fled Paris, he left a warning that feels almost personal. He wrote that, as he slipped out through the servants' gate and hurried across the chateau grounds, he saw the Baroness standing near the edge of the labyrinth. She had taken off her stag mask. She was watching him. She didn't shout. She didn't call for anyone to stop him. She just smiled. But Pierre said her smile stretched too wide, and her teeth were marked with something dark and fibrous. Then she lifted one finger to her lips, signaling him to stay quiet. His last written words were simple. "I have left the chateau, but I have not left the maze." He believed the web wasn't just hanging over a doorway. He believed the web was the entire world, and all of us were inside it, waiting for the spider to grow hungry again. 3 months later, Pierre was found dead. Authorities ruled it a suicide, even though his hands were reportedly bound behind his back. So this story isn't presented as a lesson about the past. It's framed as a diagnosis of the present. The masks, they say, were never removed. The gathering never truly stopped. The music just grew louder, drowning out anything that might have sounded like protest. So what am I supposed to do with all of this? I'm told I have two options. I can dismiss it as another conspiracy theory and scroll past it. I can go back to watching red carpets and viral clips, back to living with my eyes wide shut. That, apparently, is what keeps the system running. Or I can decide to cut the strings. The narrative says these entities, whatever they are, depend on consent. They rely on silence and passive acceptance of their symbols. But once a symbol is recognized, its power weakens. Once the art is seen as confession instead of entertainment, the spell begins to crack. There's even a warning that the algorithm is watching. That engagement with ideas like this is tracked. That anyone who listens too closely is noticed. If I've followed the story this far, I'm told I'm already on some invisible list. I'm advised not to share it casually, not to burden people who aren't ready. Instead, I'm instructed to leave a sign, a simple phrase in the comments. I cut my strings. That would be the signal, proof that I've stepped out of the maze. A declaration that I'm no longer just a guest at someone else's table. The tone turns cautious at the end. I'm told that when I shut off my screen tonight, I shouldn't stare too long into the mirror. I might feel like the reflection lags behind my movements, like it smiles a second too late, like there's a weight in the air that wasn't there before. The message ends with a warning that feels less like text and more like a presence. They know that I know. It claims the party is over, the lights dimmed, the masks removed, but something else has already begun. The hunt is described as quiet and patient, the kind where you don't realize you're being followed until the silence starts to feel intentional. Then, after a long pause, a single phrase appears on the screen. I cut my strings. And beneath it, almost like a whisper pressing against the dark, did I?